You don't want to move very fast. You want to try to keep something between you and your target, so you're not in the open, you know.
Tom Orr has always lived far from the noise of modern life, choosing the harsh, unpredictable wilderness of Montana over the comforts of the world most people take for granted. Fans know him as the tough, self-reliant mountain man from Mountain Men, a quiet legend whose survival skills, deep respect for nature, and rugged independence made him one of the show's most beloved figures. But recently, something happened that has left everyone stunned, and it all centers around what investigators discovered inside his remote cabin just moments ago. For years, Tom's cabin has been a mystery, a place viewers only glimpsed through brief scenes, never fully understanding what truly went on behind those wooden walls. But what was found inside has left friends, neighbors, and longtime fans in absolute disbelief. What makes this discovery so shocking isn't just the cabin itself, but the strange, unexpected items left behind, things that raise more questions than answers. As the news spreads, people are beginning to wonder whether Tom was preparing for something, hiding something, or leaving behind clues about a part of his life no one ever knew existed. Some say the discovery reveals a side of Tom Orr that contradicts everything people believed about him. Others think it explains long-standing rumors about why he suddenly withdrew from the public eye. Whether this finding points to a deeply personal secret, a hidden struggle, or something far more unsettling, one thing is certain: the truth inside that cabin is nothing anyone ever expected. And once you hear exactly what was uncovered, you will never look at Tom Orr the same way again. For decades, Tom Orr's remote cabin in the Montana wilderness has been a place of curiosity and fascination. Fans who watched him on Mountain Men always saw the outside of his rustic homestead: thick logs stacked by hand, antlers framing the doorway, a chimney breathing smoke into cold winter air. But almost no one ever got a real look inside. Tom guarded his privacy fiercely. His home was his sanctuary, the one place untouched by cameras, production crews, or outsiders. That is why the discovery made just minutes ago sent waves of shock through the community. It started with a simple welfare check. Tom Orr, now well into his later years, has spent most of his time off-grid. Neighbors who lived miles away said they hadn't seen smoke rising from his chimney for days, something unusual for the harsh Montana season. Concern grew quietly, and eventually someone reported that the place seemed far too still, even for a man who preferred solitude. When the first responders arrived at the dirt trail leading to his cabin, the early morning frost covered everything in a thin, ghostly layer. The wind was silent. Even the wildlife seemed to be keeping its distance, as though nature itself sensed something was off. The team walked up the wooden steps, noticing deep claw scratches on the side of the cabin, marks that did not appear old. But they didn't know whether to blame an animal or time itself. The front door, usually reinforced with a heavy latch, was slightly open. That alone was alarming. Tom never left things unsecured. The interior was dimly lit by the soft morning light pushing through cracks in the window shutters. Immediately, the crew sensed something was strange. The room had an eerie stillness. Nothing moved, yet it felt as if everything inside was holding its breath. The first thing they found was Tom's workbench. Anyone who had ever admired his craftsmanship would recognize the tools instantly: hand-forged knives, stretched leather, half-finished moccasins. But the odd part was not the tools. It was the unfinished project sitting right in the center of the table. A pair of leather boots, carefully stitched, but one side was left open as if Tom had stopped working mid-task. People who knew him said he never left a piece unfinished unless something serious had interrupted him. Next, they noticed a stack of letters, some opened, some still sealed, all addressed to Tom. Many were fan letters, but 3 in particular had unusual markings. No return address, no signature. Just the same handwritten message on the envelope: "For your eyes only." The responders didn't open them, but their presence raised obvious questions. Why would Tom receive anonymous letters deep in the wilderness? And why did he keep them in perfect condition? Another troubling detail lay near the cabin's small window, a set of muddy footprints clearly belonging to a booted stranger. They started outside and continued right up to the doorway. But here's the part that caused genuine confusion. There were no footprints leaving. They simply ended inside as if the person who made them had vanished. A few feet away stood Tom's rifle, leaning against the wall. No dust, no signs of long neglect. It had been cleaned recently, possibly within the last day or two. This single detail suggested that Tom was indeed present not long ago, and not only awake, but preparing for something. Then came the most unsettling discovery. Behind a fur curtain separating the living area from the small sleeping space, the responders found something they never expected: a hand-carved wooden box. Not large but heavy. The lid had Tom's initials burned into the top, but the lock was broken, as if someone had forced it open. What was inside the box was not immediately revealed, but the responders' reaction was enough to confirm it was something extraordinary. One of them stepped back and muttered under his breath, "This changes everything." Whatever they found inside Tom Orr's cabin was not just unusual, it was something powerful enough to raise alarm, questions, and fear all at once. And it left only one conclusion. Tom Orr's life in the wilderness was far more complex, and far more mysterious than anyone ever realized. The responders stood frozen around the carved wooden box, each of them sensing that whatever lay inside was not something an ordinary mountain man would keep hidden. Tom Orr had always lived a simple life, hunting, trapping, tanning hides, and carving tools with nothing more than his own hands. Yet this box, with its shattered lock and deep, scorched initials, immediately suggested it held something far from simple. One of the responders crouched down and lifted the lid carefully, as though expecting something inside might still be dangerous. The cabin was so quiet that the faint creak of the hinges echoed through the room. When the box finally opened, the first responder's expression darkened. His breath caught for a moment. He didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, letting the others look for themselves. Inside were 3 items, each one stranger than the last. The first was an old, weather-beaten journal. Its leather cover was cracked and the pages were yellowed, but the handwriting inside was unmistakably Tom's. Sharp, deliberate, shaped by decades of crafting everything by hand. The journal wasn't full of survival tips or trapping notes. Instead, it contained something far more personal. The entries hinted at encounters in the forest that Tom had never spoken about to anyone. Shadows moving between trees, unusual sounds at night, tracks that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The most disturbing line from the open page read, "If they come back, I may not have time to warn anyone." The responders exchanged uneasy looks. Tom's reputation was built on rock-solid judgment, calm under pressure, and absolute clarity in dangerous situations. If a man like him wrote words like these, something real must have been troubling him. The second item was a hand-drawn map, but not the kind people use for hiking or trapping. This one was crude, sketched with charcoal, and marked with several X's scattered across the land surrounding Tom's cabin. Some marks were circled. Others had small notes scribbled beside them. One X, the closest to his home, had a chilling message next to it. They were here again. Whether Tom was tracking animals, strangers, or something else, the map told a story of repeated encounters, and each mark grew closer to the cabin over time. But it was the third item inside the box that sent the greatest jolt through the room. Wrapped in a faded wool cloth was a small metal object, roughly the size of a fist. It looked old, far older than the cabin, older perhaps than any tool Tom owned. The metal was dark, worn, and carved with an unfamiliar symbol. Not a mark from any known tribe or culture familiar to the responders. They simply stared at it, confused. One man ran his finger over the carved lines and pulled back immediately, as if the metal were colder than the room itself. "What is this supposed to be?" one of them whispered. No one had an answer. They placed the object on the table beside the journal and the map, all 3 items forming a picture that raised more questions than it answered. Why would Tom keep something like this hidden? Who broke into the box? And more importantly, what were the mysterious encounters described in his journal? Before anyone could say another word, a sudden noise snapped everyone to attention. A floorboard groaned from the far corner of the cabin, not from their own movement, but from somewhere beyond the wall. The responders instinctively reached for their radios, scanning the shadows. The cabin, once silent and lifeless, suddenly felt alive with tension. One responder stepped toward the sound. He placed his hand on the wall and listened. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, another faint creak, like someone shifting their weight just out of sight. The man stepped back. "We're not alone here," he said quietly. The team immediately spread out, checking every corner, every crack, every blind spot. But they found nothing. No prints, no movement, just the unsettling feeling that someone or something had been watching them since the moment they stepped inside. As they regrouped near the table, one responder lifted Tom's map again. He traced a finger along the charcoal lines leading toward the cabin. The marks formed a pattern, but not one anyone recognized. A pattern that seemed to converge on the very place they were standing. Whatever Tom had been tracking, whatever had kept him awake at night, it was closing in. And now the responders were caught in the middle of it. The responders were still gathered around the strange items taken from the wooden box when one of them noticed a faint, almost invisible line running across the wooden floorboards. At first, he thought it was simply an old crack caused by years of harsh Montana winters, but the line was too perfect, too straight. When he knelt down and brushed away dust and bits of bark, he realized the outline matched the shape of a concealed door. The team exchanged quiet, uneasy looks. Tom Orr was a man known for his honesty and openness, someone who lived with everything laid bare. The idea that he had built a hidden door inside his cabin raised a kind of alarm none of them were expecting. Slowly, they lifted the panel. It came up far too easily, as if it had been opened not long ago. A cold wave of air rolled out from the darkness below, carrying the smell of damp earth and thyme. When they shined a light inside, they saw a narrow staircase leading into a small underground room carved directly into the ground. As they descended the steps, the dim beam of their flashlights revealed that this hidden room was not meant for storage. Everything inside seemed arranged with purpose. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old tools, carved bones, bundles of herbs, feathers, stones, and leather-bound books whose pages were the color of smoke. Nothing looked random. Each object seemed placed in a deliberate, almost ritual-like way. It felt less like a survival stash and more like a place meant to hold secrets. The responders shared the same silent question. Why would Tom, a man who lived off the land with straightforward practicality, keep something like this hidden? On a wooden table in the center of the room lay a leather pouch that seemed newer than everything else. Inside were letters written in Tom's unmistakable handwriting, but none were addressed to familiar names. Each letter described strange nights in the wilderness. Nights when the forest went silent all at once, nights when no owl hooted and no wind moved the branches. He described seeing lights drifting through the trees without making a sound and feeling vibrations in the ground as though something enormous was moving beneath the earth. In every letter, no matter the details, Tom ended with the same disturbing line. "It's getting closer." The team exchanged anxious glances. One responder whispered that Tom wasn't the type to imagine things. Another said the descriptions were too detailed, too specific to be the ramblings of a confused mind. Before they could discuss it further, the flashlight beam swept across the far wall and froze. Scratched deeply into the dirt was the same symbol they had seen on the metal object upstairs. It wasn't decorative. It looked like a warning carved in a moment of fear. Suddenly, a sound echoed from above, a creak in the cabin floor. Then another. These weren't random pops of old wood. They were distinct footsteps, slow, heavy, moving across the cabin one board at a time. The responders instantly switched off their lights, plunging the underground room into absolute darkness. Every person held his breath as the footsteps stopped directly above the opening in the floor. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the steps resumed, this time moving away until they faded completely. No one moved for a long moment. When they finally turned their flashlights back on, the underground room felt different, invaded, tainted by something unseen. One responder's light fell on the staircase, and his voice cracked as he called the others over. At the bottom of the steps was a single wet footprint. It wasn't a boot print nor the shape of any normal shoe, and it certainly wasn't human. In that chilling moment, the responders understood something terrifying. Tom Orr hadn't built this hidden room to store tools or memories. He hadn't been hiding things from the world. He had been hiding himself from something that had found its way to his cabin, and possibly inside it. The responders didn't speak for several seconds after finding the strange footprint at the bottom of the stairs. Each of them stared at it, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The shape was uneven, elongated, and marked by small ridges that didn't resemble toes or claws. It looked like something that had pressed into the dirt with slow, deliberate weight. One responder whispered that maybe it was distorted by water or mud, but even he didn't sound convinced. The silence in the room grew heavier, as though the air itself thickened with a warning they didn't fully understand. One thing was clear: whatever had been inside the cabin moments earlier had come down the stairs, or had tried to. But why had it stopped? Why leave just one print and disappear without a sound? They moved cautiously toward the staircase, shining their lights upward. The cabin above was silent again, but it felt wrong, as if each crack between the boards was holding a breath. When they climbed back upstairs, the cabin seemed unchanged, yet the atmosphere had shifted. The responders examined the doors and windows, but none were opened or damaged. It was as if the thing that entered didn't use any normal entry at all. One responder pointed to the thin layer of dust near the doorframe. There were no tracks, no marks, nothing. Just that single wet print below, sitting like a signature of something that didn't belong. Their radios buzzed, breaking the tension. A voice asked for an update, but none of them knew how to explain what they had seen. Saying it out loud would make it real. Instead, they responded with a vague report, claiming they were still assessing the situation. The truth felt too heavy to share. They regrouped in the center of the room, their eyes drifting again to the wooden box on the table. Inside it, the strange metal object still lay motionless, its surface catching the flashlight glow and reflecting it in unnatural angles. The symbol etched into it, the same one carved underground, seemed to stare back at them. One responder insisted they should take it with them for analysis, but another warned that removing it might be the very thing Tom never wanted. They realized that everything Tom hid, everything he documented, everything he carved into the walls was connected to whatever that symbol represented. The cabin suddenly creaked again, not from weight, but from a shift in the wood, as though the entire structure exhaled. A cold breeze swept through the room despite the closed windows. The responders shivered, each one feeling the unnatural drop in temperature. It didn't feel like weather. It felt like presence. One of them stepped outside to check if the wind had picked up, but the night was still, dead still. No movement in the trees, no sound from the river, no animals calling. The wilderness felt emptied out, like everything living had fled hours ago. They returned inside, uneasy and unsure what to do next. It was then that one responder noticed a paper pinned behind the stove's stone base. The edges were brittle, the ink fading, but the handwriting was unmistakably Tom's. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a note. It was a map, not of Montana, but of the forest surrounding his cabin, marked with circles and lines showing paths, blind spots, and places labeled only with short warnings. Not safe, too quiet, avoid after dark. Near the cabin, Tom had drawn the strange symbol 3 times, larger and darker than the others. The responders exchanged horrified looks. Tom Orr hadn't just been afraid. He had been tracking something for years, something that moved silently, something that returned over and over again, something that grew closer each time. As they gathered the papers and prepared to leave, one responder stepped outside first and froze. The muddy soil around the cabin, which had been undisturbed earlier, now held several more footprints, the same shape as the one below, leading away from the cabin, leading into the forest, and disappearing into the darkness beyond the tree line. But the horrifying part wasn't that there were more prints, it was that they were fresh, still wet, still glistening, and pointing straight toward the responders' tire tracks. Whatever had been in Tom Orr's cabin wasn't finished. It had followed them outside, watched them, and then slipped into the woods, moving silently, intelligently, and with purpose. And every instinct in their bodies told them the same chilling thing. It wasn't leaving, it was waiting.